The sun cast long shadows across the orchard as Josephine Turner surveyed what remained of her life's work: 30 acres of apple trees, their branches heavy with fruit that needed harvesting before the first autumn frost. She'd been a widow for exactly 6 months today, and the weight of running Eagle Creek orchard alone pressed down on her shoulders like the heavy wool shawl she wore against the cooling September air of 1875. Josephine pushed a strand of auburn hair from her face and continued her solitary walk through the neat rows of trees. At 26, she hadn't imagined she'd be a widow, left to manage an orchard in the Wyoming territory by herself. Thomas had been taken so suddenly a fall from a horse that broke his neck, leaving her with the orchard, debts, and a future she couldn't quite see clearly. The soft crunch of footsteps on fallen leaves startled her from her thoughts. Josephine turned, her hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol she'd taken to carrying in her pocket. "Madam, I don't mean to frighten you," said a deep voice. A tall figure emerged from between the trees. The man stood over 6 feet, his broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist. His face was partially obscured by a well-worn cowboy hat, but she could see he was young, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble. "You're trespassing," Josephine said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Apologies, madam. Name's Adam Ashford." He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "I've been riding for days looking for work, saw your orchard and thought you might need help with harvesting." Josephine regarded him warily. Eagle Creek was 5 miles from town, and drifters weren't uncommon in the territory. Some were honest men looking for work, others were trouble. "What makes you think I need help?" Adam's eyes a striking shade of blue that reminded her of the Wyoming sky after a storm scanned the orchard. "Those wine saps are ready for picking, and those golden russets too." "It's a lot for one person." Josephine was surprised at his knowledge of apple varieties. "You know orchards? My father had a small one back in Missouri. I grew up climbing trees before I ever sat a horse." He offered a smile that softened his weathered features. "I can see the ladder marks on that trunk over there. You've started alone, but it's slow going, isn't it?" She couldn't deny it. She'd been working from sunrise to sunset for days and had barely made a dent in the harvest. "I can pay you fair wages, but only after the apples are sold," she said cautiously. "That's agreeable. I need a place to rest more than coin at the moment. The barn has clean hay. You can sleep there." "Much obliged, Mrs. Turner." "Josephine Turner, Mrs. Turner." He nodded respectfully. "We start at dawn," she said, turning toward the farmhouse. "I'll be ready," Adam replied, settling his hat back on his head. Josephine continued her walk, aware of his presence as he moved toward the barn. She needed help, that much was true, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford to give freely anymore. The following morning arrived with a chill that promised an early winter. Josephine had been up before first light, preparing a simple breakfast of biscuits, bacon, and strong coffee. She wasn't sure if she should feed the stranger, but practicality won out. Hungry workers weren't efficient. A knock at the kitchen door announced Adam's arrival. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his tall frame nearly filling the space. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner, Mr. Ashford." "I've made breakfast." He looked surprised. "That's mighty kind." They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks against plates and the occasional sip of coffee. Josephine found herself studying him. His hands were calloused, a working man's hands, and despite his travel-worn appearance, there was a gentleness to his movements that didn't match her image of a rough cowboy. "The orchard was your husband's?" Adam asked, breaking the silence. "Ours," she corrected. "Thomas and I planted many of these trees together when we first came here 8 years ago." Adam nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss." Josephine stiffened. She didn't want his pity. "We should get started. Daylight's valuable." Outside, the morning mist was lifting from the orchard. Josephine led Adam to the barn where the equipment was stored. Ladders, picking bags, and wooden crates lined up neatly against the wall. "We'll start with the northern section," she instructed, handing him a canvas picking bag that hung around the neck and waist, leaving hands free for the work. Only take the ripe ones firm, full color. Leave any with worms or bruises. Adam nodded, accepting the bag and slinging it over his shoulder with practiced ease. You've done well maintaining the trees. They're healthy. Josephine felt a small flicker of pride. Thomas taught me everything about apples, said I had a natural feel for growing things. For the next several hours, they worked in companionable silence. Adam moved efficiently from tree to tree, his tall form allowing him to reach high branches without always needing the ladder. Josephine worked the lower sections, filling crate after crate with perfect apples. By midday, the sun was high, and Josephine called for a break. She brought out a jug of water and some bread and cheese. They sat in the shade of a large tree, the sweet scent of ripe fruit surrounding them. You handle yourself well in an orchard, she admitted. It's familiar work. Adam took a long drink of water. Reminds me of better days. What brought you to Wyoming? Adam's expression tightened slightly. War changed everything back home. After Appomattox, I couldn't settle. Been moving west ever since. You fought for the Union? Yes, madam. 4th Missouri Cavalry. Josephine nodded. The war had ended a decade ago, but its shadows lingered. Thomas had been too young to fight, but his older brother never returned from Gettysburg. And now you're a cowboy. Adam smiled, the expression warming his face. Tried my hand at cattle driving, mining, even worked a stint on the railroad. Found I prefer open spaces and honest work. Not much money in apple picking, she pointed out. Not much peace in chasing money, he countered. They returned to work, but something had shifted. Josephine found herself watching Adam when he wasn't looking, the careful way he handled the fruit, the strong line of his shoulders as he reached into the branches. It had been so long since she'd had company besides the occasional customer or supply delivery, and longer still since that company had been pleasant. By sunset, they had cleared nearly a quarter of the northern section, more progress than Josephine had made in 3 days on her own. As they stored the last of the equipment, Adam's stomach growled audibly in the quiet barn. Josephine hesitated, then made a decision. I'm making stew for supper. There's enough for 2. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition if it's payment for work, she said practically. Besides, it gets lonely eating alone every night. The admission surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. In the warm light of the kitchen, Josephine became acutely aware of how long it had been since a man had sat at her table as she served a meal she'd prepared. Adam had cleaned up, his hair still damp from washing at the pump, and he'd changed into a clean shirt that had seen better days but was free of the day's dirt. This is delicious, Mrs. Turner, he said after his first bite of the hearty stew. Josephine, she said suddenly. If we're going to work together for the harvest, you might as well call me Josephine. Adam's eyes met hers across the table. Then I'm Adam to you. She nodded, feeling a strange flutter in her chest that she quickly dismissed as the result of having actual conversation after months of silence. Tomorrow we should check the wine saps on the eastern slope, she said, redirecting her thoughts to safer territory. They catch more morning sun and ripen faster. I noticed that, Adam agreed. The soil seems different there, too rockier. Their conversation flowed more easily as they discussed the orchard, the approaching weather, and the best markets for selling the harvest. Adam was knowledgeable and thoughtful, offering suggestions without overstepping. By the time they'd finished the meal and the apple cobbler Josephine had baked the previous day, she found herself reluctant to end the evening. I should let you rest, she said finally. Dawn comes early. Adam stood, placing his napkin beside his empty plate. Thank you for the meal, Josephine. Her name on his lips sent another flutter through her chest. Good night, Adam. After he left, Josephine washed the dishes, her thoughts in turmoil. She reminded herself firmly that Adam Ashford was a drifter, a temporary worker who would move on once the harvest was complete. She wouldn't allow herself to feel anything beyond appreciation for his help with the orchard. Thomas had been gone only 6 months. Her grief was still raw, still real. These strange feelings were merely loneliness playing tricks on her heart. The next morning brought rain, a gentle, steady shower that prevented picking but was good for the orchard's soil. Josephine found Adam in the barn, methodically repairing crates that had broken slats. "You didn't have to do that," she said, watching as his capable hands worked the wood. "Can't pick in the rain, but there's always work to be done." He looked up, setting aside his hammer. "Thought I might fix that loose hinge on your kitchen door too, if you don't mind." Josephine had been meaning to repair that hinge for weeks, but hadn't found the time. "That would be helpful, thank you." They spent the rainy day on indoor tasks, Adam repairing, Josephine taking inventory of their progress and planning the next phase of harvesting. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the trees were too wet for picking. "Would you show me around the rest of the property?" Adam asked as they stood on the porch, watching the clouds part. "Might help me understand what needs doing next." Josephine led him beyond the main orchard to the smaller sections where they were experimenting with new varieties. Thomas had been particularly proud of these trees, grafting and coaxing them into producing unique apples that might fetch higher prices at market. Thomas believed diversity was the key to survival, she explained, running her hand along the trunk of a young tree. "One bad season with one variety wouldn't ruin us if we had others to fall back on." "He was a smart man," Adam observed. "He was," Josephine agreed, feeling the familiar pang of loss, though somehow less sharp than before. "He loved this land. We both did too. It shows." Not every orchard is tended with such care. They continued walking, reaching a small hilltop that overlooked the entire property. The setting sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the rows of trees with golden light. Droplets of rain still clung to leaves and branches, sparkling like diamonds. "It's beautiful," Adam said quietly. Josephine turned to look at him and found him watching her, not the view. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. "We should head back. It'll be dark soon." As they walked, their hands accidentally brushed. Josephine pulled away as if burned, but the sensation lingered on her skin long after they'd returned to the house. The days fell into a rhythm. They worked side by side in the orchard, slowly filling the storage cellar with crates of carefully sorted apples. Adam proved to be not only a hard worker, but also pleasant company. He had a quiet humor that sometimes caught Josephine by surprise, making her laugh when she least expected it. In the evenings, they would share supper, their conversations growing longer and more personal as the days passed. Adam told her about his childhood in Missouri, his parents who died before the war, and his dreams of having his own land someday. Josephine shared stories of her early marriage, the difficult first years in Wyoming, and her love for the life she and Thomas had built. She found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the way Adam listened as if everything she said mattered. It had been so long since anyone had truly heard her. A week into their arrangement, they encountered their first significant problem. While inspecting the apples in storage, Josephine discovered signs of rot in several crates. "We need to get these to market sooner than I planned," she said worriedly. "If the rot spreads, we'll lose too much of the harvest." "How far is the nearest town with a decent market?" Adam asked. "Clearwater is 20 miles south. They have a weekly market day on Saturdays. That's the day after tomorrow." Adam considered the situation. "We could load the wagon tomorrow, leave before dawn the next day, make it in time for the morning buyers." "I'll need to stay with the orchard," Josephine said. "The pickers from town are coming to help with the east section." Adam nodded. "I can take the wagon alone." Josephine hesitated. The apples were her livelihood, and entrusting them to a man she'd known barely a week seemed risky. Yet she'd seen enough of Adam's character to believe he wouldn't steal from her. "All right," she agreed, "but only take half the harvest. If something goes wrong, we won't lose everything." The next day they worked together to load the wagon, carefully selecting the ripest, most perfect specimens to fetch the best prices. As they worked, their hands often touched, and Josephine found herself less quick to pull away each time. "Be careful on the road," she said as they finished loading. "There have been reports of bandits near the creek crossing. "I'll keep my eyes open," Adam promised, "and my rifle close." That evening, their supper conversation was subdued. The prospect of Adam's journey seemed to hang between them, more significant than it should have been for a simple market trip. "I'll be back by tomorrow night," he assured her, "with empty crates and full pockets, God willing." Josephine nodded, trying to ignore the worry that had settled in her stomach. Just be safe. The next morning, Josephine rose while stars still dotted the sky. She wrapped a loaf of bread, some cheese, and 2 apples in a cloth and carried it to the barn where Adam was hitching the horses to the wagon. "For the road," she said, handing him the package. "Thank you." Their fingers touched during the exchange, lingering longer than necessary. "I should be back before dark," he said. "I'll leave a lamp burning." Adam hesitated, then reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender, so unexpected that Josephine found herself frozen, unable to breathe. "See you tomorrow, Josephine," he said softly, then climbed onto the wagon and set the horses in motion. Josephine watched until the wagon disappeared down the road, her hand unconsciously touching the spot where his fingers had brushed her cheek. The sensation both alarmed and thrilled her. The day passed slowly. The pickers arrived as scheduled and Josephine directed their work in the eastern section of the orchard, but her thoughts repeatedly drifted to Adam. Was he safe? Would he get a fair price for the apples? Would he return? That last question troubled her most. She had no real hold on him. He could easily take the profits and disappear, moving on as he had done so many times before. The thought left her feeling hollow. Evening came with no sign of Adam. Josephine lit the promised lamp and placed it in the kitchen window, its light casting a warm glow onto the porch. She tried to busy herself with bookkeeping, but found herself repeatedly moving to the window, straining to hear the sound of wagon wheels on the dirt road. When midnight came and went, she finally admitted to herself that he wasn't coming back that night. Perhaps he'd been delayed, or perhaps the thought that had been lurking at the edges of her mind all day, he'd taken the opportunity to move on. Josephine extinguished the lamp but couldn't bring herself to go to bed. Instead, she sat in the kitchen, wrapped in a quilt, listening to the night sounds of the orchard and trying to ignore the ache in her chest. Dawn broke with no sign of Adam. Josephine moved through her morning routine mechanically, making coffee she didn't drink and bread she couldn't eat. By mid-morning, she had resigned herself to the fact that he was truly gone. The sense of betrayal cut deeper than she'd expected. It wasn't just the loss of the apples, it was the loss of his company, his quiet strength, his presence that had somehow made the orchard feel like home again. She was angrily pruning a tree that didn't need pruning when the sound of approaching horses caught her attention. Turning, she saw not a wagon but 3 riders approaching from the road. As they drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Miller from Clearwater and 2 of his deputies. Cold fear gripped her heart. She dropped her pruning shears and walked quickly to meet them. "Mrs. Turner," the sheriff greeted her, tipping his hat. "Sheriff Miller, what brings you out this way?" The sheriff dismounted, his expression grave. "There was trouble on the road from Clearwater last night. A wagon was ambushed at Copper Creek Crossing." Josephine felt the blood drain from her face. "Adam," she whispered. "The fellow put up quite a fight from what we could tell," the sheriff continued. "Trail showed he managed to drive off the road and into the trees. Smart move. Bandits couldn't follow on horseback through that thick growth." "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "Alive, madam, but injured. Took a bullet to the shoulder. We found him this morning when we were patrolling the area after reports of the gang's activity. He was mighty concerned about getting word to you." "Where is he now?" "Doc Wilson's tending to him in town. The wagon and most of your apples are safe too. My deputies will help bring them back here." "I need to go to town," Josephine said firmly. "Now," the sheriff nodded, understanding in his eyes. "One of my men can drive you in." The ride to Clearwater was the longest of Josephine's life. Every bump in the road, every minute that passed increased her anxiety. Why hadn't she insisted on going with Adam? Why had she let him face the danger alone? Dr. Wilson's office was a small building on Clearwater's Main Street. Josephine barely waited for the wagon to stop before jumping down and rushing inside. The doctor met her in the narrow hallway. "Mrs. Turner, I expected you'd be coming." "How is he?" "Lucky. The bullet went through clean, missed anything vital." "He's lost blood, but with rest and care he should recover fully." "May I see him?" Dr. Wilson nodded. "He's been asking for you, through the door on the left." Adam lay on a narrow bed, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale but alert. When Josephine entered, he tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. "Don't move," she said quickly, crossing to his bedside. "Josephine." The relief in his voice matched what she felt seeing him alive. "I'm sorry about the apples, forget the apples," she interrupted, tears threatening. "You could have been killed. Takes more than some two-bit bandits to kill me." He managed a weak smile. "Though they did their best." Josephine reached out, hesitated, then took his hand. "The sheriff said you fought them off, couldn't let them take your harvest, not after all our work." His fingers tightened around hers. "I promised I'd come back." The simple words broke something inside Josephine, a wall she'd built around her heart since Thomas's death. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "I thought you'd left," she admitted. "That you'd taken the apples and moved on." Adam looked pained at her words. "I wouldn't do that to you." "I know that now." She wiped her tears with her free hand. "The sheriff says you can come back to the orchard once you're strong enough to travel. I can care for you there while you heal." "You do that?" "Of course I would." The intensity of her response surprised them both. Adam's eyes held hers for a long moment. "Josephine, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I wasn't just passing by your orchard that day. I'd heard in town about a widow with an apple harvest coming due. Folks said she'd need help but was too proud to ask." Josephine blinked in surprise. "You came looking for me specifically?" "For the job," he clarified, then his expression softened. "But staying, that was for you." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. "Adam, she started, uncertain what to say. "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving. I just wanted you to know that I'm not passing through, not anymore, not unless you want me to go." Josephine thought of the orchard, how in just a short time, Adam's presence had transformed it from a burden of responsibility back into a home filled with purpose and companionship. She thought of their shared meals, their conversations, the way his smile made her feel less alone in the world. "I don't want you to go," she said simply. 2 weeks later, Adam was well enough to return to the orchard. His arm remained in a sling, but Dr. Wilson assured them both that with continued care, he would regain full use of it by winter. The harvest had continued in Adam's absence. Josephine had hired more pickers from town, determined not to fall behind. But the orchard felt different with Adam back lighter, more alive. They settled into a new routine. With Adam unable to climb ladders or lift crates, he took over the accounting and selling arrangements, discovering a talent for negotiation that resulted in better prices for their apples than Josephine had ever received. As autumn deepened, they spent evenings planning for the orchard's future new varieties to try, improvements to the storage cellar, potential markets in the growing towns to the west. They talked as partners, each respecting the other's ideas and experience. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the orchard in gold and crimson, Adam turned to Josephine. "Winter's coming," he observed. "Yes," she agreed. "Another month and the last apples will be picked. I've been thinking about what comes after." Josephine felt a flicker of anxiety. "After the harvest," Adam nodded, his eyes serious. "I told you I wasn't just passing through, and I meant it, but I've been staying in your barn for weeks now, and that won't do when the snow flies." "No, it won't," she agreed, uncertain where he was leading. "I could find a place in town, ride out to help with the winter pruning and repairs." "That seems impractical," Josephine said, her heart beating faster. "The road can be impassable for days after a heavy snow." "It can," Adam agreed. He took a deep breath. "There's another solution, but it's not one I have the right to suggest." Josephine turned to face him fully. Suggest it anyway. Adam met her gaze steadily. I could stay here properly as your husband. The directness of his proposal took her breath away. Adam, I know it's sudden, he continued quickly. I know 6 months isn't long to grieve, and I know I'm not Thomas, I wouldn't try to be, but I've grown to care for you, Josephine, more than care, and I believe you feel something too. Josephine looked out at the orchard, the land she and Thomas had loved, had built together. For a moment, she felt a stab of guilt, as if considering Adam's proposal was a betrayal of that love. But then she remembered something Thomas had said once, during a harsh winter when they'd feared the young trees wouldn't survive. Life finds a way, Joe. Even when it seems impossible, it pushes through. She turned back to Adam. I do feel something. It scared me at first. It still does. I'm scared too, he admitted. I never thought I'd find a place that felt like home again or someone I wanted to build a life with. Then I walked into your orchard. Josephine reached for his hand. You gathered more than apples here. I gathered hope, he said softly. And if you'll have me, I'd like to help this orchard and us grow for many seasons to come. Josephine looked into his eyes and saw a future there different from the one she'd planned with Thomas, but no less precious for that difference. Yes, she said simply. Adam's smile was brighter than the setting sun. He leaned forward, his good arm slipping around her waist, and kissed her a gentle, reverent kiss that promised both passion and patience, commitment and care. They were married 2 weeks later in Clearwater's small church, with the last of the harvest's apples decorating the simple altar. Sheriff Miller and his wife stood as witnesses, along with Dr. Wilson and several of the pickers who had become friends. That night, as Josephine and Adam stood on their porch now looking out at the orchard in the moonlight, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Spring will be here before we know it, Adam said, his arm warm around her shoulders. New blossoms, new beginnings. New grafts too, Josephine added. I was thinking we might try that variety you mentioned from California. I like how you think, Mrs. Ashford. He smiled down at her, always planning for the future. Our future, she corrected, leaning into him. As they stood there, Josephine thought about the journey that had brought them together, a widow walking alone through her orchard, a cowboy gathering fruit, and, unexpectedly, her heart as well. Life had found a way, just as Thomas had said it would. And while the path ahead might hold challenges, she knew they would face them together, season after season, harvest after harvest. In the quiet orchard, under the vast Wyoming sky, they had found in each other something as essential and nourishing as the fruit they tended: love, unexpected but deeply rooted, ready to weather whatever storms might come.